they give him an immunity agreement? And why was he so defensive on the stand, offering extra tidbits of information for us that they were conveniently helping him? And why would the state put all of its eggs in the basket, the Ellen Flores basket, to prove its case? I believe what happened here in this case is that at some point, once Gilbert Police Department got their confession from Marissa, they didn't really work this case. Or at least they worked the case, but only to their benefit. Okay. This happens in many government situations, right? They work backwards. They're not working toward a truth or a justification. They were hearing things about domestic violence, but they weren't really interested in investigating that. That's not really what was going on. And so they developed this kind of tunnel vision in this case. Okay? They began ignoring evidence that was clearly out there, but that didn't fit in with their theory of the case. I mean, think about it. Rhiannon was a logical choice to ask about the incidents of domestic violence in this case. She lived in the home. She was the oldest kid. But nobody seems to ask her about any of that, did they? The forensic examiner didn't. Detective Harton, we heard from her. She asked her about the clock. And because Marissa wasn't being entirely honest, let's just get it out there at first, they chose to discredit her with everything she said. But she can't lie about everything that's coming out of her mouth. It's just not possible. Okay? And that wouldn't even comport with the facts. But once she confessed, you'll see, if you go back and you look at the tapes, that her statements are fairly consistent throughout. Now, they didn't follow up with they said that they canvassed the neighborhood, right? And they interviewed a bunch of neighbors, most of whom didn't see anything, right? They didn't interview Lisa Cole, who was at the the house right behind the Maplewood residence here. Okay? They contacted her at first, nobody was home, so whatever, we're not going to find anything here, right? And Lisa Cole witnessed the interactions between Dale and Marissa. She knew that. Okay. Most of the people around them didn't know that. That Mike Ermarosa, he didn't know that. He didn't know who these people were at all. Instead, the state chose to call this Mike Ermarosa to say about some incident that occurred in their driveway that we don't even know who these people were. And the state chose to call Clint Darrow, who was a friend of Dale's, about one punch that Dale experienced in the ribs that he laughed off, to demonstrate some propensity for violence or something. State also hired Dr. DeMarte, you heard from her the other day, to testify regarding personality tests that she'd given to Marissa. And rather than giving her the same tests that Dr. Karp had administered regarding domestic violence, she just chose to do these personality tests. But even in doing that, Dr. DeMarte could not still discount the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder that was diagnosed by Dr. Karp in her case. Her findings still have the PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. We've covered that before, just to be clear. And she was hired, make no mistake, Dr. DeMarte was hired to discredit what our client said. That's the only reason she was hired. Okay. Now, the Gilbert Police Department began reinforcing their belief in their theory of the case. This was done for insurance money rather than truly investigating this domestic violence situation. Okay. Because they wanted their first-degree murder conviction. But as you see, the insurance money, that just doesn't hold water. It doesn't make any sense that somebody would take out a policy one week and kill their spouse next week with no possible chance of recovering any money. It just doesn't make sense. So they chose not to pursue what was really going on here, the domestic violence, to the detriment of our client, Marissa. Now I want to talk about Stan a little bit here. Let's look at Stan's involvement. Now, as you saw, Stan obviously has issues. But the evidence would suggest that he was there the night of the attack. It also suggests that Marissa hugged him at some point after this all happened, because he did have blood on the back of his shirt. And it also suggests that Stan had Alan Flores' gun in his pocket. That's undisputed. And that was the same gun that was given to Marissa by Alan Flores. Now, the blood spatter evidence indicated that he was probably not the person, although we don't know for sure, nobody was there. He was probably not the person who hit Dale, the hammer. He did confess at one point, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It doesn't confirm whether he picked up the hammer or not. We don't know. The hammer was moved, but I think that some of the first responders had said that they might have moved the hammer. She stated that she had asked Stan to slap her in her confession. You remember that? She did have a mark on her cheek. They confirmed that. She didn't think it was real. What was happening? Stan was trying to confess to this. There's no question. I think a notarized copy of a letter sent to 2 different police departments is pretty clear evidence. And the evidence does indicate that Stan was trying to take the fall for this. He may have volunteered for this because he was afraid. He was very close to the girls. He may have been afraid that what would happen to their mom if he had not stepped in. So we don't know. We don't know why. Stan's former military stand-up guy. He might have just wanted to take the blame. He does have memory issues, as you've seen. Very difficult to get anything out of him at this point. That's why the state had to bring up his testimony from a previous court appearance in order to get some certain little facts out that they felt helped their case. Stan taking the blame, though, doesn't necessarily just serve, it would be wrong, there's no question. It doesn't serve the purpose, though, of just helping Marissa in this case. It didn't help Marissa. But it would have been very convenient for Alan Flores. His writing is on the confession letter. There's no dispute about that. Maybe, perhaps, Alan Flores might have been more about, had more to do with Stan taking the blame ultimately than meets the eye. Let's talk about Travis. Travis Baker. You saw him here. Interesting guy. Big. He is big. Purportedly the hitman in this case, hired by Marissa, so purportedly, to kill Dale. That's the state's theory. Obviously, we don't subscribe to that. But if you remember, when he got on the stand, he said, when she said, she told him, she didn't even bring up the subject. And he's like, I'm out of here. So there's no clear indication that what she even wanted from Travis. He didn't say, yeah, she wanted me to kill her husband. He didn't say that. He said once he heard that Dale was still alive from some weird story from a long time ago, he's like, I'm out of here. That's it. That's the whole case. Okay? He also testified he's no hitman. And if you're a hitman, I mean, you're probably going to deny it, I assume, but I think you need to ask yourselves, if she really wanted to hire a hitman, why wouldn't she have done it? I mean, there's people out there all over the place, in seedy places you can go to hire a hitman. would she have to hit Dale over the head with a hammer herself? Like I said, if she couldn't find Travis, why wouldn't she have tried to look for somebody else? Alan Flores apparently would have paid for it and paid for everything else. He would have handed her the money. He wouldn't even ask any questions, right? Now, I don't know what the going rate is for Hitman, but you know, $7,000, who knows? I don't know. As you recall, Travis had protected Marissa in the past. You heard testimony from Aisha Hale that her situation was getting worse, starting to escalate. Domestic violence was getting worse. Okay, she's getting scared. Why wouldn't she contact somebody big? Alan Flores is not a big, threatening guy, right? Travis is. So why wouldn't she have contacted Travis if she was having trouble with Dale again? He said, undisputed, that he verbally, told Dale, back off. It was his own house. He said, backed off, and apparently things calmed down after that. Because he knew that Marissa had this friend out there. Why? And the same part of an interesting question. Why would Alan Flores know Travis Tatro's name? How would he know that? That's a really good question. But why wouldn't Marissa have told him about this guy? If he's already told, and make no mistake, Alan Flores' testimony is that she told him about this domestic violence, right? And he gave her the gun as a result of that. Why wouldn't she have told him about Travis Tatro, a guy who defended her, back in the day, to help her? And I'm no expert, but if I was hiring a hitman, I think I wouldn't necessarily go around using names, right? That just doesn't seem to ring true. You kind of want that identity protected. Let's talk about what really happened that night. Like I said, all this other stuff, it's not cutting the mustard. The evidence is clearly established that Marissa was the victim of domestic violence by Dale. All the talk about money, Alan Flores, Stan, Travis, insurance, trust funds, promissory notes, it's all part of a theory of innuendo that the state is trying to advance because they believe that she's lying. That's why. They think she's lying. So there's got to be this huge, weird scheme here. That's why we're here today. But what's she lying about? Look at the lies that she's told, or purportedly told. Do they make sense? I mean, you've heard in her confession a lot of the lies. I mean, most of them don't even help her. And here again, lying is not necessarily a crime. In certain contexts it is, but she's not charged with premeditated first-degree lying. She's charged with premeditated first-degree murder. Okay, there's a difference. And here, because the state doesn't have all it needs for the premeditation count, they're trying to resort to calling her a liar and advancing all these weird theories. But like I said, I mean, somebody who's lying can't lie about everything. You have to have a context. The lies start falling apart. And you saw some of them were obviously falling apart. But the ones that were consistent were the ones about the domestic violence. Those were all consistent. Now, premeditation requires reflection. That is the ability to think about one's actions, okay, before acting and proceeding anyway. And the evidence shows that that's not what happened here. And we know that Dale was becoming more jealous of Alan Flores over time. Before this, he didn't really much care because he knew he could control her. All these boyfriends. He had girlfriends, as you heard. She had boyfriends. whatever. With Ellen Flores in the picture, that control was slipping away. You heard what Rhiannon said about the Christmas presents, didn't you? Dale was mad because Ellen Flores got better Christmas presents than he did. Okay, so this was starting to become a real issue for this couple. Dale could see that Marissa was getting tied to Ellen in more of an emotional level. Before, I don't think it was really about that. But as time progressed, and she started getting more and more, her life became more chaotic. Like Aisha Hale said, she was just descending into this kind of abyss, her lifestyle. She was getting tied to Ellen Flores. So she's got two men who are controlling. Now you heard from the experts, in this case I called Dr. Conti and Dr. Websdale. They were blind experts in the case. What did they tell you? They told you that Dr. Conti stated that the impact of child abuse affects a person's normal developmental processes. And while it's up to you to decide whether there's evidence that suggests that Marissa was a victim of child abuse, Dr. Conti did tell us what the symptoms were, and you might be able to infer some of those from his testimony. Some of these include, but are not limited to, disassociation, impaired self-reference, self-esteem, self-efficacy, disturbed relatedness, intimacy disturbance, altered sexuality, including lack of enjoyment of sex. I think we heard that from her confession, Detective Tamori. Non-responsiveness, multiple sexual partners, risky sexual behaviors, frequency of unprotected sex, work in sex industry, contracting STDs, and HIV and sex trading, assumptions regarding aggression in relationships, adversariality and manipulation, aggression, re-victimization, distrust, distortions in perceptions of others. Dr. Websdale spoke to us generally about intimate partner violence. Some of the factors that he stated were important in determining whether intimate partner violence may occur were some that a high percentage of these risk factors may be present, if you recall. Prior domestic violence, including physical assault, forced non-consensual sex, attempted strangulation or choking, threats to kill, intimidation, emotional abuse, access to guns, coercive control, escalation of abuse or tensions at home, emotional estrangement, separation or pending divorce, morbid jealousy, stepchild in the home, inadequate employment or underemployment. And keep in mind that not all of these factors apply in every single case. Okay? These are risk factors that are used to determine intimate partner violence. Perpetrators' excessive use of alcohol or drugs, childhood abuse, forced sex. Now, Dr. Websdale also characterized what happens in intimate partner violence as intimate partner coercion or terrorism or coerced control. Dr. Websdale also stated that this nearly always happens behind closed doors, nearly always. So getting reports from the neighbors usually isn't really good enough. And because it's a way of maintaining control over this person. You do it behind closed doors. And then everybody, there's a mutuality in violence sometimes. But then everybody is kind of kept in it's like the skeletons in the closet. And many, many families have skeletons in the closet. You don't want to air your dirty laundry out in public. So this usually happens behind closed doors. And the male is almost always responsible for much of the violence that's instituted. Okay. We heard from Lisa Cole, once again the neighbor, in our case in chief. Dale always discouraged Marissa from having an ongoing relationship, a friendship with her. And then she was supposed to go on a bike ride with Marissa. I remember you probably remember the story, and then she was discouraged from doing that by Dale. Lisa also testified that she saw Marissa with a black eye, and when she queried her about it, Dale responded, "Oh, she's so clumsy." Aisha Hale, the administrator, school administrator, goes here. Her impression of Dale is one of ultimate unease, general unease around him. She stated that she never felt comfortable around him, and that there was always this atmosphere of kind of control. She couldn't kind of define it, but that's what she was kind of saying. But Dr. Websdale also stated that in cases of intimate partner violence, due to the inability of the woman to confront her partner head-on, due to the size, usually, and weight restrictions or ramifications of challenging them physically, it's common for women to strike when the perpetrator of the domestic violence is at his most vulnerable. And that's because the feelings of helplessness the woman feels, the emotional entrapment she feels, makes a desperate act, not one of reflection. We also heard that people that are in abusive and controlling relationships tend to seek out partners who are abusive and controlling as well. So usually if you have, in those kind of situations, you're seeking out people that are controlling. Your psychology is seeking those people out. So if you're in a controlling relationship with one person, and you go on to the next person without getting any counseling or having any insight into your behavior, you're going to tend to be attracted to that kind of person. I think that's clear here. Dale. And Dale. It's a cycle that continues, psychological cycle. And until you break that cycle with some kind of counseling, it's going to continue. After hearing about the emotional attachment that Marissa was developing with Mr. Flores, it seems a logical step for him to reassert his authority, Dale, in a way that still allows him to retain some of his manhood. And what way would that be? What way do you think? Controlling her sexually. Taking his way with her. Raping her. Now with regard to the factors, those factors which support this theory, I'd like to point out some of the evidence. But what does the evidence show? Mr. Basta pointed out as an undisputed fact that Marissa said during her confession, she told Dale, "You don't own me." That was part of his closing argument. Why would she say this if she wasn't being assaulted? Who would think of that to say to the detective? That's not something that comes off the top of your head. The sexual assault examiner, Nurse Angel Seitz, you heard from her, she was on the stand. She documented areas of redness on Marissa that she actually saw on her body. She wasn't making it up. She's not no stake in this. This is her job. And although pictures were taken, they were taken 12 hours after the fact. So you're not going to see necessarily all the redness there. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Okay? But a closer inspection, because the light from a camera distorts sometimes. Remember, it's 12 hours later. But she did see this. And that's what she testified to. She saw the red marks. She also noted the bruises on her thighs. Marissa said that she thought they were caused by his hip bones. And she said, that doesn't make sense. But it looks like finger marks. But if there's finger marks trying to pry apart her legs, doesn't that make more sense? Why wouldn't she, if she's trying to make up this whole rape story, why wouldn't she say they're finger marks? It seems that would be more logical to assume. Or to put one over on somebody. But that's not what happened. Now, Marissa's response to Angel Seitz when asked about what happened, was consistent with her confession. Marissa told her that Dale had tried to rape her, and Angel's report gave the statement of Marissa. I'll read it for you. That was an issue. My husband and I had sex that wasn't, or possibly had sex that wasn't agreed to. I don't know because I was choked and passed out. So I don't know what happened. I went to sleep. I put a t-shirt. I woke up and my shirt was ripped. My pants were by my feet. My husband was on top of me, and his hands were on my neck, and I passed out, and I don't really know what happened. Okay, and then she goes on. He says, when he had his hands on my neck, he said, "You bitch, this pussy's mine." And he said something about the kids. I don't really remember. I was just trying to breathe. I was kicking and moving and biting and scratching, clawing. Sorry. Remember, semen was found at the scene. And there was, I'll talk about the wastebasket in a second. Well, let me address the wastebasket now. I think it's kind of important. It was brought up that the wastebasket was somehow emptied before this. So this is some indication of some kind of planning on Marissa's part. She emptied a wastebasket. But don't you think they could have found the wipes in the wastebasket? Had it been full, it would have been easier had it been full to hide any evidence or whatever, right? Well, I think what he was trying to say was she wanted to make it obvious, but then take the wipes into the other room. It doesn't make sense. They could have gotten any evidence from that house that they wanted. Okay, wastebasket or not, that's collateral issue, speculation. It means nothing. Okay, this doesn't indicate any kind of planning at all. Okay, I believe it's representative of the state's case. Empty. And there's no evidence of any kind regarding handwriting analysis of the what really happened document that was introduced. Simply because Alan Flores admitted that the handwriting was done, right, on the draft. So and here I'm talking about he talked about the letters being weird capitalizations in the middle of the document. I think I skipped. But we don't know who drafted any of this. Okay? And it's not Marissa's handwriting that exists on that document. It's Alan Flores's. We heard from Dr. Karp. She testified that Marissa suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's undisputed by Dr. DeMarco. She couldn't knock it out of the box. She tried. You could see she was struggling. She couldn't do it. She also suffers from hyperarousal, and it's a symptom, and depression and anxiety. And Dr. DeMarco hemmed and hawed about the diagnosis, and she had gave us a caveat in her report. With regard to the PTSD, it's still there. Now, where would she have gotten this PTSD? We don't know for sure. And maybe that's up for you to decide. But if you look back at some of the factors that were provided by Dr. Conti, I think you can maybe make that connection. Now, Dr. Karp also testified to Marissa's coping mechanism, disassociation, in which you're physically present, but you're not emotionally or mentally present. And therefore, you're unable to reflect. Unable to reflect. You're in the moment. Vietnam veterans, when they hear that bang, they hit the deck. It's not like they think, oh, there was a sound. They react. That's what happens when you have PTSD. You lose touch with some measure of reality under the circumstances. Now, I want to talk about Mr. McGibbon's blood spatter analysis here a little bit. I think the states use this in some ways. There's some conjecture. I want to point out some of the things that I think are appropriate or valid, some of the things that I think you really have to look at. Okay. First, yes, Dale's head may have been on the pillow at first. May have been on the pillow in the end. But the blood you can't, when you strike a body part or a head, skull, the first strike can't possibly have any blood spattered. Okay? It doesn't happen that way. It has to be the second strike. That's when the blood is released and then it flies up. Okay? So to say that Dale was asleep is not necessarily the case. We don't know if Dale was asleep or not. Was his head on a pillow? Yes. His head ended up on the pillow. But we don't know if it was there to start with. Okay. So that's the first thing, and I think that conforms to what Mr. McGivney said. The second thing he said was that the blood spatter at the scene was wild. It was all over the place. You saw the picture. It's all over the place. Very wild patterns. Okay, and he marked the distinct patterns, right? So it wasn't this cold, calculated hitting. Okay, it was furious. It was a rage. That's obvious from the scene. This was rage. This was rage. And that's what conforms with the evidence here. The hammer itself, the blood all over it, is left near the table where the picture was hung on the wall. We heard that they were hanging the picture on the wall. Why not, you could have used anything else. Why a hammer? The door to the room was slightly open, as we heard. Might have been moved by the EMT guys, Gilbert Police Department. Hammer was probably moved by them. I think there was some testimony about that, right? Remember, they took all the clothes from the scene of everybody. And I'll address the magic shorts in a second. But the shirt that Marissa was wearing, it was ripped, as you recall. But bone fragments were found in the back. It was ripped here. Bone fragments were found in the back of the shirt, inside the back of the shirt. Okay. So the shirt was ripped before this happened. Okay. She didn't just tear her shirt after the fact. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. The patterns from Stan's shirt indicated he may have walked in on the scene, like I said, toward the end of it, because the door was slightly ajar, probably. It does indicate he probably checked on Dale's condition. It looks like he knelt down, and he checked on Dale. There's blood on his knee to indicate that. So let's talk about shorts. Mr. Foster made a big deal about these shorts that Dale was wearing, or wasn't wearing, or was wearing. Mr. McGivney had testified that the shorts were moved at one point from one spot of the room to another, as you recall. There was no testimony about him wearing the shorts. We didn't hear that during the trial. None of those police officers that came through here said anything to that fact. Mr. McGivney himself, he didn't testify to that. This is all just something the state came up with after the fact. Okay? This is really the first time we're hearing this morning, about these magic shorts. Okay? But there's no indication that these shorts were on Dale, okay, and that she removed them. Okay, there's no evidence to support that. If you look at the pictures, he would probably, if he had blood spatter on his legs, it would show that the legs were smeared. They took pictures of the scene. It shows smearing on his legs, and even if it did show some smearing, I mean, he rolled off the bed. How do we know? And the shorts were moved from one place, because we know that because of the blood spatter, right? But that is no indication that they were on him. Doesn't make any sense. After this happened, the first thing you do is take some of these shorts off of them? That's just preposterous. And plus, they said there was blood on the inside of the band or something like that. They didn't do any DNA analysis on that blood, did they? Could have been moved by the first responders. I'm sure they had blood on them. They were trying to save him. They were trying to save him. concerned about a pair of shorts at that point? Obviously they were moved. We don't know how, we don't know why. Okay? Doesn't make any sense, doesn't comport with the evidence in the case that the shorts were taken off him by anybody, let alone by Marissa. Just doesn't make sense. How about some of this other evidence we're talking about? Confession, tape recordings. Well, Marissa may not have been truthful at first. Once she confessed, once Cy Ray came into the room, Sergeant Ray, she was with Detective Tamori. Remember, she didn't know, she had no idea what was going on with Dale. She had no idea. She knew he was injured. She didn't know the extent of his injuries. The vast majority of the details that she offers at that point are consistent. If you go back and look at that tape, I'm telling you. Consistent with domestic violence. Look at her demeanor, too. Rhiannon herself. She hasn't had contact with her mother in 5 years, save for one phone call, as per a court order. Okay. But she still remembers the abuse at the hands of her dad. I mean, her mother endured at the hands of her dad. And yeah, there was some mutuality, but she said herself, Dad always hit Mom more than Mom hit Dad. That's consistent with intimate partner violence. And this whole idea about the 237 timing, this big mystery. 237. And the call didn't come in till 2:45. Okay. There was a lot of running around in the house, obviously. But remember what Rhiannon testified to. She awoke to hearing, Dale, 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 stay with me. What do you think? Who do you think would be saying that? It would be a first responder, right? Makes sense. As a matter of fact, that's what they said they were saying to him. They were telling him to stay with them. And they did a fantastic job of saving him, I might add. That is one thing we agree on. Prosecutor, they did do a damn good job. Those EMTs. But this 8-minute interval is nothing. Okay? It's not there. This is conjecture. Okay? Why not wait 10 minutes? Why not wait 20 minutes? Why not make sure that he's dead if you're trying to kill him? Doesn't that make sense? They didn't. Marissa called 911 right away. Yeah, she was freaking out. It might have taken a minute to find the phone, whatever. But she called 911 right away. No dispute. Okay, now, I'd like to turn your attention to the premeditation definition in first-degree murder, in your final instructions about first-degree murder. Okay, if you could follow along with me, indulge me here. I believe it's on page 8. Premeditation means that the defendant intended to kill another human being, or knew she would kill another human being, and after forming that intent or knowledge, reflected on the decision before the killing. It is this reflection, regardless of the length of time in which it occurs, distinguishes first-degree murder from second-degree murder. An act is done with premeditation if it is the instant effect. An act is not done with premeditation if it is the instant effect of a sudden quarrel or passion. I think that's what the evidence shows here. Okay. At least the blood spatter, it's wild. It's all over the room. And you got to remember here, just because somebody says, back in 2003 that they might think about, they thought about killing their husband or their wife, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. Okay? Just because you say that. How many thoughts have come through, probably everybody in this courtroom's head about killing their wife or killing their spouse. Okay? It's the act upon it. You have to have a nexus. You have to have a connection between that act and the desire to kill. It has to be there. And in this case, it's just not. Okay? considered, you heard a lot about Marissa. This case is all about Marissa, all about Dale, all about Marissa. But there are a lot of things that you might not like about her. Okay? But this is not a popularity contest. She's not running for head cheerleader here. Okay? You have a very serious job to do, and I know you're going to do a good job. I'd also like to turn your attention to the justification for self-defense in your final instructions. That's on page 13 and 14. Read those to you. These are important. A defendant is justified in using or threatening to use physical force in self-defense if the following two conditions exist. A reasonable person in the situation would have believed that physical force was immediately necessary to protect against another's use of apparent, attempted, or threatened use of unlawful physical force, and the defendant used or threatened no more physical force than would have appeared necessary to a reasonable person in the situation. The defendant may use deadly physical force in self-defense only to protect against another's use of apparent, attempted, or threatened use of deadly physical force. Self-defense justifies the use of threat or physical force or deadly physical force only while the apparent danger continues, and it ends when the apparent danger ends. The force used may not be greater than reasonably necessary to defend against the apparent danger. The use of physical force or deadly physical force is justified if a reasonable person in the situation would have reasonably believed that the immediate physical danger appeared to be present. Actual danger is not necessary to justify the use of physical force or deadly force in self-defense. Now it goes on a little bit. I'll let you read it for yourself, because I think that's going to be an important one for you to see. But I want to point out a few things about that. Okay. When you're in an intimate partner violence situation, domestic violence situation, the apparent danger simply doesn't go away because your partner leaves the room. It's always present. Okay? Always present. The testimony indicates that there was, in fact, an escalation of violence from Dale, which seemed to be worsening over the short few months, that time period. We heard that from IJM. And the use of force was, at that point in time, at the time of the attack, it wasn't lethal. You've got to keep that in mind. It ultimately caused the death of Dale, yes. But at that time, he didn't die. He died 3 weeks later of a pulmonary embolism. Okay. Now, the state will get one more chance to speak to you in their rebuttal case. It's only fair. They have the burden of proof, right? So they should get the last word here. Okay. Before they do, I want to point out one more instruction for you. It's on page 6. Burden of proof, reasonable doubt. The law does not require a defendant to prove innocence. Every defendant is presumed by law to be innocent. The state has the burden of proving each defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The state must prove each element of the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil cases, it is only necessary to prove that a fact is more likely true than not, or that the truth is highly probable. In criminal cases such as this, state's proof must be more powerful than that. It must be beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. There are a few things in this world that we know with absolute certainty. And in criminal cases, the law does not require proof that overcomes every doubt. If, based on your consideration of the evidence, you are firmly convinced the defendant is guilty of the crime charged, you must find her guilty. If, on the other hand, you think there is a reasonable possibility that she is not guilty, you must give her the benefit of the doubt and find her not guilty. Okay? Now, what does all this mean? It's legalese. It's instruction. It's been crafted by lawyers, right? Well, I have a little chart that I'm going to share with you. Try to explain it for you. chart, we have a number of things on the not guilty, on the not guilty side. Let me explain some of those to you. Okay? If you don't know if she's guilty or not, gotta find her not guilty. If the evidence is clear and convincing to you, that's a legal standard, by the way, clear and convincing evidence, gotta find her not guilty. If there's a reasonable suspicion that she might have been up to something and we're not sure about that, still got to find her not guilty. If you think, well, possibly or maybe she's guilty, still got to find her not guilty. If there are probable cause, reasonable grounds, not guilty. Probably guilty, still have to find her not guilty. If it's highly probable even, she's still not guilty. And preponderance of the evidence, it's more probable than not. This chart is not in order. I think clear and convincing is usually at the top of it, and then it kind of goes down, and there's some in there. But for all intents and purposes, if the evidence isn't there, you have to find her not guilty. Okay? Unless you can find every element beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? What does that mean? Basically, that means that if there's some alternative reason that makes sense, then you might have a doubt, right? Then you can't find her guilty. But if you find that there's no possible alternative explanation reasonable to you, then you have to find her not guilty. Okay? It's a high standard. They know it, we know it, and that's why this is up here. Okay? It's to help you. Couple of things before I close completely. Remember, the law doesn't require a unanimous verdict. Any case, this case, state of Arizona doesn't require it. If you can't come to a decision about first-degree murder, you've got to move on and start to consider second-degree murder. Okay? And then justification. And also, before I finish up here in a minute, I'd like to stress the importance of all of you. You're a group. You're a jury. You need to treat each other with respect. Okay? I said that at the beginning of the case. We picked you because you said, yes, I can treat my fellow jurors with respect. Okay? I know it's difficult for you to come together as 12 strangers. There's only going to be 12 of you in a few moments, probably. Pick some alternates. Okay. Or maybe an hour, whatever it is. But you got to take the time and review the evidence, take it seriously. Okay. Be respectful of each other. Remember, 3 things. She called 911 twice. Dale was injured, but didn't die right away. Died of a pulmonary embolism 3 weeks later. Finally, if there were guns at the house, why weren't they used? Seems if it was a planned event, it would make a lot more sense to use a gun. I mean, the obvious choice is that Dale weighed quite a bit more than Marissa's.